Your soulmate is missing Youdeeply.Ahearteeltco Conversationiscoming very soon. Something stirred in a place where silence had been winning for far too long. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a message. It was a moment so small that almost nobody would have noticed it, but your soulmate did. They paused in the middle of an ordinary day for no obvious reason. A familiar memory drifted across their mind like a scene from an old movie they never meant to replay. They smiled for only a second. Then the smile disappeared, replaced by the quiet realization that no matter how hard they tried to stay busy, something about you refused to leave their heart. And here's the strange part, this feeling didn't fade after a few minutes. It grew stronger. If you stay with this story, you'll understand why the conversation that's coming could change everything between you. Across town, another ordinary moment quietly became unforgettable. Your soulmate found themselves staring out a window while the world kept moving around them. Cars passed. People laughed. Music played somewhere in the distance. Yet none of it reached them. Their thoughts had wandered somewhere much deeper. They remembered something you once said, something that seemed insignificant at the time but suddenly carried a completely different meaning. Isn't it amazing how one forgotten sentence can return exactly when the heart is finally ready to hear it? That single memory unlocked another, and then another, until they realized they weren't simply remembering you, they were missing the version of themselves that only existed whenever you were part of their world. But there is one detail almost no one expects. They haven't figured out how to tell you yet. That's why every quiet pause has become longer than before. Every unfinished sentence remains trapped behind uncertain eyes. Watch what happens next, because the smallest decision is about to create the biggest opportunity. Meanwhile, life continued to play subtle signs in unexpected places. A familiar song played at the exact wrong, or perhaps the exact right, time. A street reminded them of a conversation they thought they had forgotten forever. Even simple routines began carrying unexpected emotions. None of these moments felt dramatic on their own, but together they formed something impossible to ignore. Deep inside, your soulmate started imagining what would happen if the distance between you disappeared, even for a single honest conversation. Not a perfect conversation. Not a magical one. Just a real conversation where no one pretended to be stronger than they actually felt. And that's where this story quietly changes direction. Because someone who has been holding back for so long eventually reaches a point where silence becomes heavier than speaking. You're closer to that moment than you realize. One unexpected choice, one unexpected message, one unexpected moment of courage, and two hearts that have been carrying unanswered feelings may finally meet in the middle. But before that happens, one final realization still has to unfold, and it will arrive sooner than either of you expects. A quiet shift was already beginning long before either of you could see it. Your soulmate woke up with the strange feeling that something important was waiting just beyond the edge of an ordinary day. Nothing around them looked different, yet every familiar place seemed to carry your presence. The coffee they poured sat untouched. The conversation they tried having with someone else felt incomplete. Their attention drifted again and again toward memories they had never planned to revisit. What surprised them wasn't the fact that they were thinking about you. It was how impossible it had become to stop. Every attempt to move forward somehow circled back to the same question. What if I simply told them how I've really been feeling? Stay with this, because the answer to that question is closer than they realize. Sometimes the heart doesn't need another sign. It simply reaches the point where silence no longer feels like protection. It feels like regret. Later that day, an unexpected conversation changed the atmosphere completely. It wasn't about love at first. It wasn't even about relationships. Someone casually mentioned how quickly opportunities disappear when people assume there will always be another chance. Those words landed harder than anyone expected. Your soulmates suddenly became unusually quiet. Their expression changed. They smiled politely, but their thoughts had already traveled somewhere else. They weren't thinking about yesterday anymore, they were imagining tomorrow without another missed opportunity. That possibility unsettled them more than they wanted to admit. Before we continue, if this story reminds you of someone special, feel free to share it with them. And if you're enjoying this journey, subscribing and leaving a comment helps stories like this reach others who may need them too. Now here's the detail that makes everything even more interesting. Later that evening, they opened an old conversation, not to rewrite the past, but to remember what honesty once sounded like. They read familiar words with completely new eyes. Hidden between ordinary sentences, they found warmth they had overlooked before. Suddenly, reaching out no longer felt impossible. It simply felt overdue. As night settled in, your soulmate found themselves rehearsing conversations that had never happened. They imagined your reaction. They imagined the silence before the first words. They imagined laughter replacing uncertainty. They even imagined admitting the one thing they had hidden for far too long, that missing someone doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it grows quietly until it fills every empty space. And that's exactly where they are now. The distance no longer feels comfortable. The unanswered questions no longer feel acceptable. Somewhere inside, a decision is forming with surprising clarity. They may not know the perfect words yet, but they finally know they don't want another day to pass without trying. The next chapter won't begin with coincidence. It will begin with courage. And when that first heartfelt conversation finally arrives, one unexpected sentence will reveal just how deeply they've been missing you all along. The evening carried an unusual kind of calm, the kind that often arrives just before something meaningful changes. Your soulmate wasn't searching for distractions anymore. Instead, they allowed themselves to sit with the thoughts they had been avoiding for so long. Every memory felt sharper now. They remembered the little pauses in your conversations, the way laughter could erase an awkward moment, and how even silence between you never truly felt empty. Suddenly, they realized they hadn't been missing a single moment, they had been missing the feeling of being understood. That realization settled deep within them, impossible to ignore. Stay with this, because one unexpected discovery is about to make everything even more personal. Without planning it, they found themselves looking at something that reminded them of you. It wasn't extraordinary. It could have been a familiar place, an old photo, or even a song playing softly in the background. Yet it carried enough emotion to stop them completely. Their eyes lingered a little longer. A quiet smile appeared before they whispered words no one else was there to hear. In that private moment, they admitted something they had never fully admitted to themselves. They weren't waiting for the perfect timing anymore. They were waiting for the courage to let their heart speak without fear of being misunderstood. And strangely enough, that courage was beginning to grow. Every passing hour made the distance feel less like protection and more like a wall they wanted to remove. There's one piece of this story you haven't seen yet, and it explains why everything is accelerating now. Later that night, while the rest of the world seemed to slow down, your soulmate made a promise only they could hear. The next meaningful opportunity would not be wasted. No more wondering how things could have been. No more letting important feelings remain hidden behind ordinary conversations. They imagined the first honest words they wanted to say to you, then imagined your expression when you heard them. For the first time in a long while, that vision didn't fill them with uncertainty, it filled them with hope. Somewhere between memory and possibility, they finally understood that missing someone deeply is not the end of a story. Sometimes, it's the beginning of the conversation both hearts have been waiting for. And just when they thought they had one more day to prepare, something completely unexpected started moving events forward faster than either of you could have imagined. A single unexpected moment arrived without asking for permission. Your soulmate was in the middle of an ordinary routine when their attention was pulled somewhere else entirely. A familiar name appeared. A passing conversation echoed something you once said. It lasted only a few seconds, yet it felt as though time had quietly slowed down around them. They stopped what they were doing and took a long breath, realizing that every road they had been trying to follow somehow led back to the same destination, you. It wasn't nostalgia anymore. It wasn't curiosity either. It was certainty. They could no longer pretend that these feelings would simply disappear with time. Keep watching closely, because the next choice they make isn't accidental. It's intentional, and it changes everything. That evening became different from every evening before it. Instead of wondering what might happen someday, your soulmate began preparing for what could happen very soon. They imagined hearing your voice again, not in their memories, but in real life. They thought about the first words they would say and the long pause that might come before either of you smiled. Surprisingly, they weren't searching for perfect lines anymore. They wanted honesty. They wanted the kind of conversation where every sentence came straight from the heart instead of being carefully rehearsed. If this story has kept you wondering what happens next, sharing it with someone who believes in meaningful connections, and subscribing if you'd like to follow the rest of this journey, helps keep these stories alive. But don't leave yet, because the most important part hasn't happened. There's still one hidden piece your soulmate hasn't revealed, and it's the very reason they're finally ready to reach out. Just before the night came to an end, they looked at their phone one more time. Their finger hovered for a moment, not because they were uncertain about you, but because they understood that one simple message could open the door to a conversation capable of changing two hearts forever. Then something remarkable happened. The fear that had followed them for so long suddenly felt smaller than the hope waiting on the other side. They smiled, not because the story was finished, but because it was finally beginning. Somewhere, at almost the exact same moment, the distance between your hearts became shorter than it had been in a very long time. A heartfelt conversation was no longer just a possibility. It was becoming the next chapter. And when the first honest words are finally spoken, one unexpected confession will leave both of you speechless and reveal just how deeply you've been living in each other's hearts all along. The night carried a different kind of energy, as if the world itself had quietly stepped aside to make room for something deeply personal. Your soulmate wasn't distracted anymore. Every excuse they had been holding onto suddenly felt too small compared to the truth growing inside them. They walked slowly, replaying countless moments that once seemed ordinary but now revealed something they had missed. Every smile you shared, every conversation that ended too soon, every goodbye that lingered just a little longer than expected, it all fit together like pieces of a puzzle they could finally see. Stay with this, because the next realization doesn't just explain their feelings, it reveals why they can no longer keep them hidden. For the first time in a long while, they stopped asking themselves whether reaching out was the right decision. Instead, they asked a completely different question: what if they're hoping to hear from me too? That thought changed everything. Suddenly, the fear of being misunderstood became much smaller than the possibility of finally being understood. They imagined you reading a heartfelt message, hearing the honesty behind every word, and realizing that not a single feeling had ever truly disappeared. The future no longer felt uncertain, it felt unfinished, waiting for one brave step to complete it. Before this moment slips away, notice one important detail. Every meaningful connection reaches a point where silence can no longer carry the weight of everything left unsaid. Your soulmate has reached that point, and their heart knows it. As dawn slowly approaches, something inside them becomes wonderfully clear. The conversation they've been imagining is no longer a distant dream, it has become a promise they're quietly making to themselves. They don't expect perfection. They don't expect every answer. They simply want the chance to be real, to speak without hiding behind hesitation, and to let you know how deeply you've remained in their heart through every passing day. Somewhere between courage and hope, they begin believing that the strongest relationships aren't built by perfect timing, they're built by two people choosing honesty at the same moment. And just when they decide they're finally ready to take that first step, an unexpected sign appears that tells them they may not have to wait much longer. The very first words of your heartfelt conversation are now closer than ever, and the opening sentence will be nothing like either of you imagined. A quiet morning arrived with the feeling that something invisible had finally fallen into place. Your soulmate opened their eyes with an unusual sense of peace, as though the answer they had been chasing wasn't somewhere far away anymore, it was already waiting inside them. The uncertainty that once followed every thought about you had slowly given way to something much stronger. Confidence. Not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that whispers, "It's time." As they moved through the day, little reminders continued to appear in the most ordinary places. A familiar laugh from across the room. A phrase that sounded exactly like something you would say. Even the sky seemed strangely familiar, bringing back memories they hadn't visited in months. One after another, these moments pointed in the same direction. They were no longer trying to forget you. They were preparing to find you again. Stay with this, because the next decision is made not with logic, but with the heart. As the hours passed, they finally stopped rehearsing imaginary conversations and started listening to what they genuinely wanted to say. The words became simpler than they had expected. There was no dramatic speech. No complicated explanation. Just honesty. They wanted you to know that missing you had quietly changed them. It had taught them patience. It had shown them the value of the moments they once overlooked. Most importantly, it had made them realize that the strongest connections don't disappear simply because time passes. They wait. They grow. They quietly become impossible to ignore. There's another piece you haven't seen yet. While your soulmate was gathering the courage to speak, they couldn't shake the feeling that you might somehow be thinking about them too. That possibility didn't feel like wishful thinking anymore. It felt like the beginning of something real, something both hearts had been moving toward without even realizing it. Then came the moment that changed the rhythm of everything. They reached for their phone, not out of habit this time, but with clear intention. Their heartbeat wasn't racing because they were afraid. It was steady because they had finally accepted what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. They smiled, took one slow breath, and realized that the hardest part was never speaking. The hardest part had been waiting this long to be honest. Somewhere, almost at the exact same moment, another quiet shift began unfolding, one that neither of you could have predicted. The distance between two lives that had been traveling separately was beginning to disappear, one choice at a time. And just beyond this moment waits the conversation you've both been moving toward from the very beginning. A conversation that won't simply answer old questions. It will open a brand new chapter that neither of you will ever forget. The moment you've been moving toward finally began with something so ordinary that almost anyone else would have missed it. Your soulmate picked up their phone, unlocked the screen, and paused. Not because they had changed their mind, but because they understood that the next few seconds could become a memory they would carry for years. Their reflection stared back at them from the dark screen for just an instant, silently asking one final question: if not now, then when? This time, there was no hesitation. No second guessing. Only a calm certainty that had been quietly growing through every memory, every missed opportunity, and every moment they realized how deeply they had been missing you. Stay with this until the end, because what happens next isn't about luck. It's about two hearts finally reaching the same emotional destination. Instead of searching for the perfect message, they chose the most honest one. Every sentence they considered sounded too complicated, so they erased it. Every dramatic opening felt unnecessary, so they started again. Then they smiled. They realized the truth had always been simple. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations begin with the smallest words. A sincere greeting. A genuine question. A quiet admission that someone has been on your mind more often than you ever expected. As those words finally came together, an unexpected sense of relief washed over them. It felt as though they had been carrying an invisible weight for far too long, and now they were finally setting it down. But here's the remarkable part. Before they could press send, another thought entered their mind. They pictured not only the beginning of your conversation, but everything that could come after it. The laughter that had been missing, the stories waiting to be shared, the misunderstandings finally disappearing, and the comfort of knowing neither of you had forgotten what truly mattered. Then the silence ended. Not with a dramatic announcement or an unforgettable spectacle, but with one quiet act of courage. The message was sent. In that single moment, uncertainty gave way to possibility. The distance that had once felt impossible suddenly seemed much smaller than either of you had imagined. Somewhere, your world was moving toward an answer you didn't even know was already on its way. The heartfelt conversation promised from the very beginning had finally started, but its first exchange was only the opening page of a much larger story. Because once two people choose honesty over fear, every word that follows carries the power to build something stronger than either of them could have imagined. And just when it seems you've reached the ending, one heartfelt response will arrive that transforms this reunion into something even more unforgettable than the conversation itself. The reply didn't arrive with flashing lights or perfect timing. It appeared quietly, almost gently, as though it had been waiting for the exact moment when both